Vincent Camarda spent 30 long years building the exact kind of reputation that makes people stop asking questions. He built his foundation locally, entering the securities industry in 1994, equipped with an accounting degree from Hofstra University. Over decades, he fortified his standing by maintaining official, active licenses with top regulators, including the SEC and FINRA. For a long stretch of his career, he carried the Certified Financial Planner designation. That credential exists to signal to a worried retiree that the person sitting across the desk has met a rigorous standard, has been vetted by industry professionals, and has a lucrative career to lose if he lies to you. The clients who ended up in Camarda's office were not naive speculators looking for a quick payout. They were mostly elderly individuals who had spent their entire working lives being meticulously careful with their money. When they sat down with him, they gave him incredibly explicit instructions. Using plain language, they told him repeatedly that they needed him to preserve their life savings. So we have highly cautious retirees handing their hard-earned money over to a thoroughly vetted, highly regulated advisor. To understand how a perfectly conservative setup becomes a financial trap, we have to look at what Camarda built behind closed doors. The trap was a proprietary set of 5 private investment vehicles called the Camarda Funds. Along with his firm's president, James MacArthur, Camarda aggressively pitched hundreds of his advisory clients to purchase promissory notes issued by these specific funds. This chart shows the strategy he sold them. In private placement memorandums and face-to-face meetings, Camarda guaranteed his clients these funds were safe and low risk. He promised their money would be heavily diversified, carefully spreading the risk across multiple different investments. But 4 of those 5 funds bypassed diversification entirely. They were dumped straight into a single, highly volatile mining venture. The 5th fund was similarly concentrated. It funneled every dollar into one high-risk business, a startup drive-thru coffee company. Instead of a calibrated portfolio spreading out risk, the money was concentrated into extreme, isolated bets. He executed the exact opposite of the cautious strategy his clients required to survive. The high-risk coffee startup was not a random investment. Buzzed Express Coffee was actually owned and operated by Camarda's own relative, and Camarda himself sat as the company's president. He never disclosed this relationship to the retirees whose life savings were funding it. This animation shows how the mining venture was also rigged. The mining company paid 17% interest on its notes, but Camarda and MacArthur only passed 9% to 11% along to their clients. They quietly pocketed the massive spread in between, netting themselves nearly $3 million, simply by acting as middlemen. This financial architecture had a direct precedent in his career. In 2017, Camarda got involved with Par Funding, a merchant cash advance business that would later be exposed by federal authorities as a Ponzi scheme. Camarda quietly took out a $750,000 personal loan from Par Funding. Without disclosing that personal debt, he and his partner went on to raise more than $75 million from over 200 of their own clients, selling them Par Funding's unregistered securities. As the Par Funding scheme began to publicly collapse in 2020, the regulatory consequences did not hit Camarda right away. He used that window of time to launch the Camarda Funds. He watched a fraudulent system fall apart from the inside, managed to outrun the immediate fallout, and then built an entirely new in-house version of the same trap before the first one had even finished collapsing. We have to look past the undisclosed conflicts and the bad investments, because hundreds of thousands of dollars never reached an investment vehicle at all. Camarda was blatantly intercepting client money the moment it was wired to him. This chart breaks down one documented case where a single client wired over $770,000 to his firm. Camarda sent about $370,000 of it to the mining operation. The remaining $400,000 went directly into his personal bank accounts. He used that stolen money to pay down his own personal credit card debt. Prosecutors tracked the rest of the funds to a string of purchases, including plastic surgery, expensive jewelry, and luxury travel. He was buying luxury goods in the exact weeks and months that his elderly victim was sitting at home, fully believing their life savings were quietly and safely growing inside a low-risk fund. The conservative promises he made in the front room of his office were a complete fiction, designed entirely to fund the reality of his backroom operations. Those licenses with federal regulators and the accounting degrees were supposed to protect investors. Instead, he manipulated the institutional weight of those credentials to bypass his client's natural caution. For a specific type of bad actor, 30 years in business, a polished mahogany desk, and a wall of framed certificates are not signs of safety. They are highly effective tools engineered to disarm you. Vincent Camarda proved that when a client relies entirely on the appearance of unquestionable trust, they are handing over their absolute deepest vulnerability. For years, Vincent Camarda's firm maintained a reputation for steady performance. Interest payments went out to investors at 9 or 11%, arriving with the mechanical reliability of a clock. This diagram shows the truth. Payouts were funded by new investor capital, not profits from the mining or coffee businesses. The money moved in a circle. This structure works until the business stops producing cash, revealing the gap between promised returns and actual money. When the cycle broke, it revealed the distance between what investors were told and what was actually happening to their money. The safe, low-risk, diversified investment they were sold was none of those three things. The math finally failed in early 2024. Both the mining business and the coffee company defaulted on their obligations at the same time. This was a quiet, mathematical collapse. The business simply reached a point where it could no longer pay what it owed, rendering the fund unable to meet its obligations without the need for a whistleblower or a forensic audit to uncover the truth. The defaults triggered a chain reaction, hitting hundreds of retirees simultaneously. They discovered all at once that their retirement foundation had vanished. The SEC's civil complaint details the massive financial toll of this failure, approximately $123 million in unreturned principal. For many, this was their entire life savings. The SEC noted that several investors had explicitly told Camarda years earlier that this was the exact outcome they could not afford to risk. While the 2024 defaults were the public end of the firm, the regulatory case against Camarda had been building since 2022. The first major crack appeared when the SEC charged Camarda AG. Morgan and James MacArthur for their role in distributing par funding securities, a scheme connected to a personal loan Camarda had never disclosed to his clients. By August of 2022, the Certified Financial Planner Board had imposed an interim suspension on Camarda's CFP designation, specifically because of those charges. This created a brutal asymmetry. The very credential that signaled trust and safety to his clients was quietly revoked years before most of those clients would understand why. At the same time, individual client complaints were moving through FINRA arbitration panels. These panels eventually ordered more than $7 million in awards against AG Morgan, a slow accumulation of verdicts that signaled a growing crisis. Taken individually, these looked like isolated disputes. Together, they described a pattern regulators had been circling long before the criminal case caught up. Regulators had identified the danger, but the fragmented nature of rulings meant warnings weren't loud enough to protect the bulk of the retirement funds. The pattern of individual disputes finally became a coordinated federal prosecution on April 3, 2026. Vincent Camarda appeared at the federal courthouse in Central Islip to plead guilty to securities fraud and investment advisor fraud. Before United States District Judge Nusrat J. Chaudhary, the architect of the firm admitted to the betrayal of his client's trust. Federal prosecutors and the FBI stripped away the language of financial mismanagement. They explicitly labeled the scheme as a betrayal of trust used to finance extravagant personal purchases. Between Camarda's guilty plea and the SEC's parallel civil complaint, the true hidden structure of the fund was finally entered into the permanent public record. Camarda faces a maximum of 20 years in prison, with his final sentencing scheduled for August of 2026. The court-ordered penalties are precise: over $6 million in forfeiture and more than $160 million in restitution owed to the victims. These massive financial debts mirror the physical unraveling of Camarda's life. By the time of the plea, both his office building in Massapequa and his home in Amityville were already in foreclosure proceedings. Despite these court orders, victims rarely see a full recovery in cases of this scale. The gap between what a judge orders and what investors actually receive is usually a permanent one. The 2026 reckoning didn't bring the money back, but for the 400 people who trusted Camarda with their future,
It provided a public acknowledgement, entered under oath, that the word safe had never been true.